And it's Ken Kreitzer for Sons of the American Legion Radio, and we are based at Squadron 135 in White Plains, New York. And today we are very pleased to have a couple of authors with us. We have Pete Elman, who is a teacher, musician, and writer, and calling in from Oakland, California. Pete, good to have you with us today.
Nice to be here, Ken. Thank you.
And back with us after much too long is our friend Arif Khatib, who is in Oakland also. And he is, we worked a number of years ago to honor two veterans from Pelham, New York, who were outstanding high school and college football players. And Arif is the founder and president emeritus of the Multi-Ethnic Sports Hall of Fame. Arif, how are you?
I'm just great, and thank you so much for having me, Ken. It's good to see you again.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. Now, you gentlemen were just published a book in the Shadow of Obscurity, Toiling in a Reluctant Society.
Yes.
And it's a terrific story of trailblazing athletes from a diverse background, athletes of color, and who really were able to succeed against very difficult challenges. And why don't we start here a little bit about it, Pete and Arif? You put this book together, just published. Tell us a little bit about why you decided to write this and publish it.
Ken, this goes way back during the Hall of Fame, as you well know, where we honored people. I call them unheralded heroes and heroines. And this book was supposed to be a companion to a documentary that we hope to be finished by April. And that documentary is called Because They Believed. So this book was going to be a companion. The subjects in the book are not in the film and vice versa. But the idea behind the whole thing is that, like Pete, I'm an educator and a teacher. And having been involved in the history and the great contributions that these people of color have made to American sports and society, I just got involved, and the more I got involved, the more it became my passion. And it ultimately ended up with this book, which is something that I've wanted to do for about 10 years. But the pandemic has allowed us to do it, quite frankly. And we started this in January, I believe. And the publisher released it to Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and to her, the publishing company, I believe on December the 13th. And we've just been really, really excited about what has happened to this book in the past month, 35, 40 days, Ken. We're just overwhelmed with the success of it so far.
Well, that's good to hear. And Pete Elman, why don't you tell us a little bit about, you've got a lot of stories in this book about African-American athletes and others who overcame severe challenges to have success in a variety of sports. Pete, tell us a little bit about how you chose some of the athletes for this and some of the stories that you wrote up.
Sure. Just to backtrack just slightly, I got involved with this because I had covered Arif's Multi-Ethnic Sports Hall of Fame awards induction ceremony in 2019 and 2020, which were held in Oakland. And they were both wonderful events, and I was asked to cover them as a writer, which I did. And that's where I met Arif, and we clicked. And and I don't think Arif will mind me saying this, but over the course of 2019, I helped him edit several chapters he wrote of his memoirs for his friends and family. And I was just fascinated by his life, which is, I mean, this man, it's an understatement to say he's done a lot of different things and knows a lot of people. But it's not just the things he's done and the people he knows, it's what he's done. And like Arif, I've always had a fascination with not just sports. You know, when I was a kid, I played sports and coached my kids and all that and wrote about it. But a real interest in social justice and racism. My old man was a lawyer for the Department of Justice. I grew up in D.C. And he pretty much, I wouldn't say indoctrinated, but definitely impressed upon me, you know, what was happening and the need for change in this country. And like Arif, I'm a real student of history. I've taught history in public school. I love history. And I found myself doing a lot of writing lately. So when Arif came to me and asked me to help him put this book together, you came up right away because he said, well, you know, I've got several contributing authors who have already written pieces in my magazine, which was a companion piece to his induction ceremonies for the Hall of Fame. And I said, well, let me see him. So I went over to his house, you know, way back in like March or April, and the pandemic was happening, right? And we were, you know, sitting 15 feet apart, and he brings out all these magazines, and one of them had your piece in it, which I looked at, and I, to be honest with you, not to flatter you, but I knew immediately that I would want that piece for the book. And some of the other people that are in the book, we have 24 chapters, Ken, and we have 27 individuals because 3 of the chapters are about 2 individuals. But the thing that interested me was we already had a built-in content component to this book, right? We already had, I'm guessing, Arif, we might have already had picked out 10 or 12 of the subjects, people who had been written about by yourself and other authors. We have some excellent authors, Monty Poole, who's a Bay Area sports writer, Doug Harris, who's a filmmaker who wrote something about Don Barksdale, a local sports writer, Mike McGrean, just people from all different areas, scholars, historians, sports journalists, writers. And it just kind of came together organically. You know, I mean, sure, we did some trial and error, but I think for the most part, the 24 chapters that we settled on with these 27 people, I don't think we really disagreed between the 2 of us about including or excluding any people. And for me, the origin of it, for me, and then I'll stop talking in a second here, was I had written a chapter for a book which has not been published that I wrote about the same time that you met Arif, 2007. And that book is about a dozen guys that up until the pandemic, I would work out with these guys every morning at the Berkeley YMCA. And one of the fellas had played pro ball. His name was Pumpsy Green. And it turns out he was a friend of Arif, like Arif knows everybody. But Arif had a special connection with this gentleman. They went to high school together in El Cerrito, California. And so, Arif, I guess it's fair to say that you knew Pumpsy for like 60 years, right?
At least.
At least. And his wife. And Pumpsy was a beautiful person. And I wrote this chapter about him. It was pretty lengthy. And I said, so Arif, maybe we could, you know, use the chapter of Pumpsy and we can take it from there. And that's exactly what we did. And I feel like we got a nice blend of athletes from many different sports, different parts of the country. You know, most of them, I think more than half, are no longer living. Then we also did some things that I thought were fascinating. We included a chapter about a woman here in the East Bay, and you may have read it, Ken, that has a golf organization for women called Sisters on the Links.
I saw that, yeah.
And her name is Janet Johnson. She's not a professional athlete, but she's a wonderful person who is just one of her missions in her life is to help women of color learn the game of golf. But that's really just the front. Once you get past that initial thing, it's to help them with their lives and their confidence. And so I like to think that all of the chapters that we did delve into, to some extent, not just these people's contributions to their sport and, you know, why they're not really in the Hall of Fame. We cover that historically, but what I tried to do and what Arif and I tried to do, and he was always insistent that we make sure we keep the emotional aspect to these people's stories front and center. Would you say that's correct, Arif?
Absolutely.
We wanted to keep that emotional bond. And I just, you know, it's like Arif likes to talk about the spirit. And I mean, that's pretty much what we did. You know, we've got some chapters in there that you'd say, well, who are these guys? You know, Eli Howard and Eugene Evans. Well, you know, not too many people know about these gentlemen that went to your high school, but
yeah,
the more I read about them and the more I thought about it, and my dad was in the service in World War II, right? And you know, and I've always been a supporter of the military, but to read your story and then get into it and read some more about how they gave their lives for their country. it was very fulfilling for me to do this.
Well, we appreciate so much that you included the story of Colonel Eli Page Howard and Lieutenant Eugene Evans from Pelham. We discovered them by noting that we studied the names of the people whose names we read on Memorial Day, about 65 names, and then we were able to find bits and pieces of information about them. And turned out one of the veterans in our American Legion post had been the football manager for their high school football team in the early 1940s, and how revered they were. And then we were able to find the story of their success in college, playing for a national championship Morgan State team, and then being in the first ROTC class at Morgan State after the Truman executive order opened up the Army and the officer corps to African Americans. And then they're graduating, and then service, and then sadly Eugene Evans led a mission across enemy lines one night, and he was lost. And then Eli Page Howard, who also served in Korea, went through kind of the normal career of an Army officer. That time in the U.S., time in places like Germany, served in Vietnam, and was promoted to lieutenant colonel, had a 1,000-member regiment that he was leading, and sadly died when his helicopter was shot down during a fierce battle in 1969. And so you very nicely recorded the story in your book. They were athletes, but they were tremendous American heroes from their service in the military. Colonel Howard is buried at Arlington National Cemetery, and Eugene Evans is buried at a cemetery in New Rochelle, New York, close to where his wife, Millie, worked at New Rochelle Hospital for many years. And we met her, and the New Rochelle Hospital gave her a reception in her honor when they kind of heard the whole story of her husband and how devoted she was to his memory. But, it kind of brought up in studying that era of college football, which I spent a lot of time on now, the late 1940s, the historically Black colleges were really having kind of a heyday. And they had tremendous athletes on their teams. And then they were, playing all across the country. And one game in particular stayed with me that Morgan College played at the Polo Grounds against Wilberforce, and it was a big New York Times article about it, and you could just tell it was a big deal for the African American community in New York City at the time, and and you could just imagine what that was like to play in the Polo Grounds for those teams, and what a big day it was. So those teams are increasingly being remembered as very, very competitive football teams, and it was great to be able to recognize them. I guess that's one of the areas it was different that struck me in reading the book was between the college football leagues, which led to many African American stars joining the NFL, but then also the Negro leagues were very popular, very successful, had great athletes, and then led to stars starting like Jackie Robinson and Hank Aaron, who just passed away, joining into to the major leagues. Those were interesting organizations in football and in baseball that you profile in your book. You got a lot of baseball stars who played in the Negro leagues.
Ken, you speak of the Negro League. One of the first ones we have in there is Mamie Johnson. And I may add that when I chose Pete as the co-author, I knew probably 70% of these athletes that we chose to be in the film as well as the book. Some I knew personally, others I had some kind of contact with them, except in the book, we had a good guy who was doing the 1800s. I didn't know him. But 70% of the others, I knew them in one way or another. And having said that, you were speaking of Morgan College. One person in my film, Raymond Chester, great tight end from Oregon State, has a very compelling story about when his great grandmother was a slave. We talk about that in the film. So it was easy for us to get the subjects because I already knew who they were. And I would ask Pete to interview certain ones, and I did the others. So we set that up, and we worked great as a team. We really a great team in that regard. And he's a prolific writer and a great editor. So it was a match made in heaven, if you will.
Well, I really enjoyed the section on golf and the story of Pete Brown, the professional golfer, and Charlie Sifford, who I saw play a couple of times here in Westchester. I'm pretty sure I saw Charlie Sifford play in the U.S. Open in '74. I have to go back and check the records on that, but you know, that was a time where African American golfers were getting their first chances in the PGA Tour. And you point out that Joe Louis, the boxer, was a big help because the promoters of the golf tournaments all wanted Joe Louis in the Pro-Am. And Joe Louis would say, well, you got to bring along Pete Brown and Charlie Sifford and a few others to the tournament.
A lot of people don't know that.
And what a great story that is in your book.
Yeah, a lot of people aren't aware of that. I speak with Pete Brown's Wooder often, just a few days ago. He's going to be inducted, of course, posthumously in the Mississippi Sports Hall of Fame because he's from Mississippi. And they have the book, by the way, and the newspaper down there is covering it and so forth and so on. So all these chapters and all these people were carefully chosen for a reason. That's why we have the lieutenant and corporal in there, is because these folks made great contributions to American service, history, and sports, and people don't know who they are. Thank you for doing what you're doing to shine the spotlight on them, and we chose them to put in this book so we can further the effort.
Well, you guys did a tremendous job on this. Maybe is there an athlete you'd like to highlight that really overcame a lot to be successful, that stands out in your memory? Pete, is there one in particular that overcame a lot?
Yeah, well, there's several, but one in particular I was thinking about when you were talking a couple of minutes ago about collegiate football. His name is Burl Toller, and he occupies a fairly lengthy chapter in the middle of the book. When I started to be a sports writer 20 years ago, in 2000, I hadn't been on a high school football field since I was 16, and I was a bad quarterback. So I start writing sports, at the age of almost 50, and I go to this high school game, and I retell the story in the chapter. And basically, the short version is that the very first play of the game, I'm on the sidelines with my notepad. First time ever as a professional sports writer doing a high school game, right? And these kids are taking the kickoff, and they're all running like Usain Bolt down the sidelines, right? The kid's got the ball, and he's being chased by 3 kids. And he gets tackled, and the kids are all excited. It's the first play of the season, Ken. High school football in Alameda, California. And these kids stand up, and they're facing off like the Sharks and the Jets, right? They're ready to throw down right there 10 feet in front of me. And I'm like, whoa, this is the first play of the season, and these kids are going to have a fight? Before you could say boo, this older gentleman comes in, and he's the white hat referee. And he calmly breaks him up, says, good play, give me the ball, son. And he took it from there, and I did not take my eyes off that gentleman for the next 2.5 hours. And at halftime, I asked the side judge, who is this referee? He's amazing. He's like a teacher. He's like a guru of football. He says, oh, that's Mr. Toller. And I, of course, did not know that much about Burl Toller, except I knew that he had played college football, and I knew that something famous had happened the year I was born, in 1951. Well, I mentioned this to Arif, and he said, oh yeah, we got to put this guy in the book. He's a Bay Area guy. Well, Burl Toller did 2 of the most trailblazing things any athlete has done in this country. In 1951, along with his teammate, Ollie Matson, at University of San Francisco, refused. Well, their team was invited to the Orange Bowl on the condition that the team leave the two African-American players, Burl and Ollie, behind.
Uh-huh.
And there's a wonderful clip that we have referenced at the end of the chapter. You can see a little dramatic video, historical video of this. And basically the kids on the team, and their coach was a fellow named Joe Kuharich, who became a professional football coach. And they said, with the coach's blessing, if they're not going to invite Burl and Ollie, who were the two best guys on the team, we're not going. So these kids who all their lives had played football, dreaming about playing in what was going to be the Orange Bowl, said, if our teammates can't come, we don't come. So Burl was part of that. And that has been described as one of the most courageous acts ever by a college football. 14 years later, he was hired by his old friend Pete Rozelle to be the first black referee in the NFL. And in this chapter, Arif said, why don't we give Jim Tunney a call? Well, those of us who know pro football, who've been watching the Super Bowl forever, know that Jim Tunney is really the dean of all NFL referees.
Sure.
He may be the greatest one of all time. He's done tons of Super Bowls. Well, what most people don't know about Jim is that he's a wonderful person, a brilliant man who's got a PhD, has written several books, who's in his 90s down in Monterey, California. He's still got a website. He's always writing. He's a wonderful person. So Arif put me in touch with Jim, and we talked on the phone for about 2 hours. And I mean, I was thrilled like a little kid to speak to this gentleman. And he told me, shared with me so much about Mr. Toller and how they worked as refs together. So, in that chapter, we have titled, His Best Was Sure Good Enough. And I got that phrase from his daughter, who lives in LA, who I talked about. So that's a chapter that I think we're very glad that we were able to put that one in the book. And then Pumpsy Green, who I mentioned, who went to high school with Arif, he was the first black player for the Boston Red Sox.
Yeah.
In 59. And I talk about that because I heard it from him. He was my friend. And he told me everything all about Ted Williams. So I know that more Arif than myself, but we have a lot of first-person primary source material in this book, which really makes it nice. So
very good.
I'm really pleased. And the last thing I'll say is I had a wonderful conversation with Spencer Haywood, and a lot of people don't realize that even though he's a Hall of Fame basketball player, Spencer Haywood was really the Kurt Flood of basketball. And we have a chapter on Kurt, and maybe I'll let Arif talk about Kurt because they were pretty good friends.
Yes,
Basically,
and
I
I remember Kurt Flood very well when he played for the St. Louis Cardinals, and when he had his contract dispute that really stood out, and he insisted on creating opportunities, better opportunities for players. Arif, why don't you tell the Kurt Flood story?
What I'd like to do before then is to tag on to what Pete has already said. As I indicated earlier, that I probably know at least 70% of these people in there. And Burl Toller was a good friend. And as you mentioned on Jim Tunney and I went to his memorial together. And I both of them are in my Hall of Fame. Burl and Ollie Matson was inducted at the same ceremony in Las Vegas. And Jim Tunney later here in the Bay Area. So I was in touch with both of them on a regular basis, and I often would thank Jim. He wouldn't take credit for it, but I thanked him for supporting and helping Burl become the first black referee because he was on his crew. And he told me a lot about how they got along and so forth and so on. So I wanted to throw that in. That these guys were good friends of mine, and Jim still. As far as Kurt Flood, I met Kurt in the 80s, about 1982 or 83, I think it was, at a reception for Orlando Cepeda in San Francisco by the Giants. And he and I'd never known before, but he and I hooked up that day with follow-up visits, going out having cocktails together. And Kurt just opened up for me about a lot of things, about the problem that he had with the commissioner, and his decision to not to go to the Philadelphia Phillies and to challenge the rule, etc. And so we got to be really great friends. We would meet on at least once a week at his house or wherever we decided to go. And then I ultimately I think there were 206 or 7, it escapes me, inducted him posthumously into my Hall of Fame. And that's when I got a chance to meet his family. Incredible, incredible people. But Kurt was a lot more than people realize. First of all, he was a very talented artist. He sold his artwork when he couldn't play baseball to keep his stuff going. He went over to Spain. That's when he did most of his writing. He did one a portrait of Dr. Martin Luther King that became very, very popular as well as famous. So he was a lot more than a baseball player, but he was one hell of a man. I just had the utmost respect for him for the sacrifice that he made for the benefits that were to follow to those who were to get the big baseball contracts. I just was reading a couple of days ago where this catcher, a $115 million contract, he batted .251 with 11 home runs. And so I said, these kind of people should crawl on their knees all over. Thank Curt Flood, because here's a man who turned down $100,000, and they're making millions now, and a large number of the athletes who are playing today, Ken, as you well know, don't know who he is. And so my idea was to keep his story and his life alive. So I have this proposal for the city of Oakland. We would probably have it in 2 months from now, except for the pandemic, was to establish the Curt Flood Platinum Award, which is the top award you can get anywhere. You got the gold award for Gold Glove and all that. What I want to do is establish a Platinum Award for Curt Flood in his hometown of Oakland, and have the funds go towards the maintenance and promotion of Curt Flood's park that we have here in Oakland, because not many people know where that's at, anything about it. So that's my dedication, and that's my promise to him, that I would keep his story alive and keep his history and his contribution and his sacrifice alive for as long as I live.
What a difference Curt Flood made through his efforts that have helped so many baseball players since then, and really changed the game of baseball. I remember him, the Curt Flood story when I was growing up very well. Now maybe we should.
That's for all professional sports, Ken. All professional sports, not just baseball. Football, baseball, basketball, hockey, and all the other professionals. They making their money because of Curt Flood and the free agency.
Oh, absolutely. And you can make a case that Curt Flood, what he did, forced Major League Baseball to think in much bigger terms, in terms of marketing and generating revenue, and bigger crowds that all resulted out of the push from Curt Flood. Now, maybe just I want to mention that the book, In the Shadow of Obscurity, Toiling in a Reluctant Society, can be purchased on Amazon. I checked it the other night. And you mentioned, where else is it available?
It's available from the publisher. That's at ENHPublishing.
Okay. Well,
.com.
We'll put that in the caption to this video, and maybe have you each give a final thought. Pete, Elman, you had some great stories today. Final thought about what people will learn by reading your new book.
Our hope, and Arif referenced that we're both educators and have been for a long time, as well as sports fans and people who love history. I think our hope is that, like Arif said, but that people will read these stories and be made aware of a collection of individuals who did not have the fame of Babe Ruth or LeBron James or, or Joe Montana or people like that. And then also from some sports that don't get as much attention as those big three. We have a wonderful chapter about a fella from Canada who played professional baseball and professional hockey. But because he was African American, not because he was Canadian, he did not get an opportunity to either play in the NHL or Major League Baseball. So I would say that, what my hope and expectation is for this book is it'll make people all over the country and perhaps all over the world aware of something which is pretty much a particular American legacy. The same way that jazz and folk music and rhythm and blues and rock and roll and country music is a huge part of our cultural legacy as Americans, sports have always been a huge part of our legacy, and it frequently defines us. And people like to say frequently, the old cliche of, about character in an athlete, that it reveals their character, right? It doesn't necessarily build it, it might reveal it. And I believe that the 27 individuals in our book, having read and studied and now written about their lives and their careers, all displayed, and I don't think this is a stretch to say, heroic qualities. And these heroic qualities manifested themselves not only on the playing field, but in life itself. And, what are we but a collection of stories? So, Arif, to you.
Very final thought.
Yes, Pete and I, of course, when we wrote this book, as teachers, educators, we wrote the book for the content, and that young people, junior high, high school, junior college, universities, and beyond, will use this book to learn about the incredible contributions that people of color have made to sports and society. We have what they call the systemic racism right now, where you look at people of color one way. We want them to look at them in another way, in a way where they made major and continue to make major contributions to American sports, and particularly Olympics. So when we wrote this book, we were not looking at dollar signs. We were looking at, excuse me, we were looking at the content to educate. So when people say your book may be a million seller, oh, well, maybe so, but that's not what we wrote it. We didn't write it for the income, we wrote it for the outcome. And if it does make money, that's all well and good. But we really want to educate people about the major contributions these incredible heroes have made to our society.
Well, you both have done a terrific job with this new publication, In the Shadow of Obscurity, Toiling in a Reluctant Society by Arif Khatib and Pete Elman. Really great to chat with you today. So good that you included the story of Pelham, New York heroes, Eugene Evans and Eli Page Howard from my hometown, to outstanding high school and college athletes who gave their lives in U.S. Army military service, defense of our country, and just a phenomenal set of stories about athletes of color who had to overcome unique challenges to succeed in each of their athletic endeavors. So great to talk to you. I hope we can do this again, and great to work with you both. And Arif, maybe just finish telling us a little bit about your Hall of Fame. We didn't really hear a good description of the multi-ethnic sports Hall of Fame that you have developed over a number of years.
Well, the Hall of Fame was established, and whenever I do interviews on the ask me, why did you install it? I said, I'll tell people straight up, to fill a void. Because your traditional halls of fame, hockey league, baseball, basketball, football, did not completely exclude people of color, but they were limited. And you look at basketball, and they say basketball is 80% Black. and you look at the halls of fame going back, you will not see that it's comprised of 80% Black. So I saw some inequities there, and I felt that there was a need for this Hall of Fame to hopefully make a contribution towards correcting it. So initially it was called the African American Ethnic Sports Hall of Fame, and remained that. It was only exclusively for African American, again, trying to fill a void, until 2009. And then because the world is becoming more diverse and cultural, I changed the name to multi-ethnic so that we can include people irrespective of their ethnicity and color. We didn't look at race anymore. We just looked at individuals. Unfortunately, the major halls of fame prior to that did not have that same attitude and philosophy when the committee chose who was going to be inducted. And that happens even today. I can give some stories and confirm them, but I won't hear on this. But that's happening even today, where politics and other issues are just making the decision for the nominating committee about who's to be in the Hall of Fame. You look at just recently for the Major League Baseball, there were no athlete, no baseball players was inducted at all this year for the first time in 25 years. Are you going to tell me there were not any players out there was eligible? Absolutely they were, but those who make the decisions make the decisions. So if there was the multi-ethnic sports Hall of Fame, I don't look at the same those. I look at what contribution they made, what was their batting average, what kind of contribution they made to their community, what about their integrity, and look at it like that. And that's why the Hall of Fame was established, and that was the vision and its mission from day one, and remains so today.
Very good. Is there a website or a place where someone can look up more information about your Hall of Fame?
multiethnicsportshalloffame.com.
Absolutely. We will highlight that on our caption and look through that. We will look forward to it. You've done really a great job with that over a number of years, Arif. And Pete Elman, thank you so much for joining us today. And great to hear about your background in music and writing and teaching, and the stories that you have portrayed in this book. Really great to talk with you today. I look forward to doing this again. Arif, thank you so much for re-engaging on this, and we wish you the best with this book. We're going to try to help you promote it as best we can.
We want to thank you, Ken, because you're doing a fabulous job. Absolutely fabulous job from what you're doing. It should be done. Somebody has to do it, and you've chosen to do it. And I think you're doing it well. You had a great, great show today, and thank you so much for bringing us on.
Our pleasure, Oz. Very gracious. Appreciate that.
I'd like to second that feeling from Arif, and if I could just take like a minute, just because Arif was talking about his Hall of Fame, and he's being very modest. I just would just like to read this.
Please, go ahead.
Comes from our book. This book tells the story of the journey, struggles, and achievements of a special group of unheralded athletes of color. In these pages, you'll learn about a handful of brave trailblazers, men and women whose skills and exploits contributed to an array of sports. We must elevate these pioneers to their deserved position in the pantheon of sports. Our goal here is to continue the mission of the Multi-Ethnic Sports Hall of Fame, namely to shed light on a group of unsung individuals who, by their example, have inspired and educated all of us. In this collection, we've assembled past and current articles written by a stellar group of authors, journalists, and historians who've generously contributed their work, and this book is dedicated to the many athletes of color who paved the way for countless others who never received proper recognition, for those who toiled in the shadow of obscurity. That's what
Absolutely.
we're trying to
Arif,
do.
you've done a terrific job with this, and I want to go through your website and see more of the stories that you have there. It's a great presentation to the public, a great educational effort that you have made with this. And again, we look forward to doing this again, and hear more about how your book is doing. And it's really, I can tell, part of a process of education. I know you have a film coming out, and there'll be other efforts that you will be able to present the message through your efforts. So really good to speak with you today. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Ken.
Good to
Arif,
see you
thank
again,
you.
man.
Pete, thank you. And again, this is Ken Kreitzer for Sons of American Legion Radio. The book is In the Shadow of Obscurity, Toiling in a Reluctant Society by Arif Khatib and Pete Elman. It is available on Amazon and from the publisher. And we'll have more information in the caption about this. Great to see this, and that the book includes a story of two Pelham, New York natives, Eugene Evans and Eli Page Howard. So for Sons of American Legion Radio, we're based at Squadron 135 in White Plains, New York. Have a great day, everybody.